Jacob McAllister found the first body half buried in the snow. A woman, frozen solid, her arm still reaching toward the cabin door she never reached. His horse stamped nervously as the blizzard howled around them. Then he heard it. A child's voice, weak and desperate, crying out from inside that rotting structure. He pushed open the door, and 8 pairs of terrified eyes stared back at him. 8 children. Alone, starving, and one little girl dragging herself across the frozen floor with a twisted leg, positioning herself between him and the others like she could somehow protect them. If you're watching from somewhere in this world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Clara's story can travel. And if her journey moves you, hit that subscribe button and stay until the end. You won't regret it. The winter of 1877 had already killed 17 people in Silver Creek by the time Jacob McAllister rode out to check his northern fence line. He knew this because Doc Weatherby had told him so 3 days ago, standing in the general store with snow still melting off his coat. 17 souls, mostly the old and the sick, a few children who'd caught the fever that swept through town like God's own punishment. Jacob had buried enough people in his lifetime. His wife Martha, 4 years gone now. His twin boys, Daniel and Thomas, taken by that same fever when they were only 6 years old. He'd dug their graves himself because the ground had been too frozen for anyone else to help, and his hands had bled for a week afterward. He didn't think much about death anymore. It came when it came. A man just kept moving until it was his turn. The snow had been falling for 3 days straight when his horse Soldier stumbled on something buried in a drift. Jacob dismounted, his boots sinking knee-deep into the white, and brushed away enough powder to see what had tripped his animal. A hand, gray and stiff, fingers curled like they were still reaching for something. He kept digging. The woman was maybe 30 years old, though the cold had made her face a mask that could have belonged to anyone. She wore a thin dress, completely wrong for this weather. No coat, no gloves. She'd frozen to death, trying to reach a cabin that sat maybe 50 yards ahead, half hidden by the storm. Jacob stood there for a long moment, looking at her. Then he looked at the cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin and weak, but rising. Someone was alive in there. He tied Soldier to a dead tree and pulled his rifle from its scabbard. Could be anyone. Outlaws using an abandoned structure. Squatters who might not appreciate company. His hand found the familiar weight of the weapon as he pushed through the snow toward that weathered door. The crying hit him first. A child's voice, high and frightened, cutting through the wind like a knife. Jacob kicked the door open. The smell nearly drove him back. Human waste, rotting food, sickness. But worse than the smell were the faces. 8 of them. Children, all of them, ranging from a boy who looked nearly grown to a tiny girl who couldn't have been more than 6. They huddled together near a dying fire, wrapped in every scrap of cloth they could find, and they stared at him with eyes that had already seen too much. One girl separated herself from the group. She was maybe 10 years old, with dark hair and a face that might have been pretty if it wasn't so thin. She dragged herself across the floor, one leg twisted at an angle that made his stomach turn, positioning her small body between him and the other children. Like she could protect them. Like she'd done this before. "Stay back." Her voice cracked from disuse, but there was steel in it. "I don't know who you are, but these children are under my protection." Jacob lowered his rifle slowly. "Easy there, miss. I ain't here to hurt anyone."
"That's what the last one said."
The girl's gray eyes never left his face. "Right before they took what little food we had left and rode off." Jesus Christ. Someone had robbed them. Robbed a bunch of starving children in the middle of a blizzard. "My name's Jacob McAllister. I have a ranch about 15 miles south of here. He kept his voice calm, the way he'd talk to a spooked horse. I found a woman outside, frozen. Was she with your group? Something flickered across the girl's face, pain so deep it looked almost physical.
Mrs. Henderson. She went for help 2 days ago. We told her to wait for the storm to break, but she said the little ones couldn't last much longer without food.
She didn't make it. I'm sorry. The girl absorbed this information with a stillness that worried him more than tears would have. She'd already learned not to cry. At 10 years old, she'd already learned that grief was a luxury she couldn't afford.
That makes 3 dead now.
Her voice was matter-of-fact.
Mister?
Patterson froze in his sleep last week. His wife Mary died of fever 3 days later. Now Mrs. Henderson. What about your folks? Dead. Everyone's folks are dead. She gestured at the huddled children behind her. That's why we're here, and they're not. Jacob took a step closer, and the girl immediately tensed. He stopped. I ain't going to hurt you, any of you. I give you my word. Words don't mean much out here, mister. No, I suppose they don't. He crouched down, bringing himself closer to her level. Up close, he could see how badly she was shaking, how blue her lips had become. But I've got a warm ranch with food and a fire that don't go out. I've got a partner named Gus who makes the best stew you ever tasted. And I've got room enough for 8 children who need a place to stay. Why would you help us? The suspicion in her voice cut him somewhere deep. No child should have to ask that question. No child should have to doubt that adults would help them when they needed it. Because my boys would have been about your age, if they'd lived. The words came out before he could stop them. He hadn't talked about Daniel and Thomas to anyone in years. And because I couldn't live with myself if I rode past and let you die. The girl studied him for a long moment. Behind her, the other children stirred. A little red-haired girl started crying softly, and an older boy with broad shoulders moved to comfort her.
My name's Clara,
the girl with a twisted leg finally said.
Clara Whitmore. And if you're lying about any of this, I swear to God I'll find a way to make you regret it.
Despite everything, Jacob felt something like respect stir in his chest. Fair enough, Miss Whitmore. Now, can we get you and these young ones somewhere warm before we all freeze to death? Clara turned to look at the group behind her. Jacob watched her take stock of each child, assessing their condition with eyes too old for her face.
Will, can you walk?
The oldest boy nodded. He was maybe 14, with the build of someone who'd done hard labor. I can carry one of the little ones too, if needed.
Good. You take Patty. She hasn't walked in 2 days.
Clara pointed to the smallest girl, who had pressed herself into the corner and was watching everything with huge, terrified eyes. She hadn't made a sound since Jacob arrived.
Rosie, can you manage?
The red-haired girl wiped her tears and nodded bravely.
I can walk, Clara. I'm not a baby. I know you're not.
Clara's voice softened slightly.
Sam, Ben, Eli, you 3 stick together. Help each other if anyone falls.
The 3 boys ranged in age from about 7 to 11. One of them, a dark-skinned child who couldn't have been more than 7, kept his eyes fixed on Jacob with an expression of deep distrust. Jacob recognized that look. He'd seen it on former slaves who'd learned the hard way that freedom didn't mean safety. What about Maggie? Will asked, gesturing to an older girl who sat apart from the others. She was maybe 12, with features that suggested mixed heritage, and she glared at Jacob with open hostility. I don't need help from anyone. Maggie's voice was sharp as broken glass. Especially not from some stranger who probably just wants something from us. Maggie. Clara's tone carried a warning. He's our best chance. Maybe our only chance. That's what they said about the wagon train. Look how that turned out. The wagon train left us. This man came looking. Clara turned back to Jacob, her gray eyes searching his face for something.
Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her. "We'll come with you, Mr. McAllister. But I need to know one thing first." "Ask it." "That woman outside, Mrs. Henderson. She died trying to save us.
Will you bury her proper, with words and everything?" The request hit Jacob harder than he expected. This child, starving and frozen and responsible for 7 other lives, wanted to make sure a dead woman got a proper burial. "I'll bury her proper," he promised, "soon as the ground thaws enough to dig. Until then, I'll make sure the animals don't get to her." Clara nodded once, satisfied. Then she tried to stand. Her twisted leg buckled immediately, and she would have fallen if Jacob hadn't caught her. She weighed almost nothing, skin and bones wrapped in determination. "I can walk," she insisted, even as her body betrayed her. "I just need a moment." "I'm sure you can, but there's no shame in accepting help when you need it." Jacob looked at the other children, who were watching the exchange with varying degrees of fear and hope. "That goes for all of you. You've been taking care of yourselves for too long. It's time to let someone else carry the weight for a while." "We don't know you," Maggie said, but some of the hostility had faded from her voice. "We don't know anything about you except what you've told us." "That's true. You'll have to decide if I'm worth trusting." Jacob shifted Clara's weight in his arms and moved toward the door. "But I figure you can make that decision somewhere warm, with food in your bellies. The alternative is staying here and freezing to death." He said it bluntly, without trying to soften the reality. These children had been through too much for gentle lies. They deserved honesty, even when it was harsh. "He's right." Will stepped forward, the tiny girl Patty cradled against his chest. She hadn't moved or made a sound the entire time. "We can't stay here. The fire's almost out and there's no more wood. Another night and we're all dead." One by one, the children began to move toward the door. Rosie held hands with Ben, the boy with the Polish accent, who kept muttering prayers under his breath. Sam walked alone, his face set in lines of bitter skepticism. Eli stayed close to the walls, watching Jacob with those wary, ancient eyes. Maggie was the last to move, and she stopped in front of Jacob before stepping outside. "If you hurt any of them," she said quietly, "I'll kill you. I don't care how big you are or how many guns you have. I'll find a way." Jacob met her gaze steadily. "If I hurt any of them, I'll deserve it." The blizzard had weakened slightly by the time they emerged, but the cold was still brutal. Jacob whistled for Soldier, who came trudging through the drifts with the patience of a horse who'd seen everything and feared nothing. 8 of you. 1 horse, Jacob calculated quickly. "The littlest ones will ride, everyone else walks. We move slow, we move together, and we stop for no one. Understood?" The children nodded, their faces pale but determined. "Clara, you're on Soldier with Patty and Rosie. Will, you keep Ben and Eli close. Maggie, Sam, you're with me at the front." "I can walk," Clara protested. "My leg isn't that bad." "Your leg is exactly that bad, and we both know it." Jacob lifted her onto the horse before she could argue further, then handed up Patty, who still hadn't spoken or reacted to anything. Rosie climbed up behind them, wrapping her arms around Clara's waist. 15 miles, Sam said flatly. "In this weather, half of us will be dead before we get there." "No one's dying today." Jacob took point, breaking trail through the snow. "Not on my watch." They moved in silence for the first hour. Jacob kept a brutal pace, knowing that stopping meant death. The children stumbled and fell, picked themselves up, kept moving. No complaints, no crying. They'd already learned that tears froze on your face out here. It was Eli who spoke first, his small voice nearly lost in the wind.
"Mister? That lady back there, Mrs. Henderson. She wasn't our mama or nothing.
She was just a stranger who got stuck with us when everyone else died." "That's so." She gave us her food for 3 days, said she wasn't hungry, but we knew she was lying. Eli's dark eyes met Jacob's. She died for us, and she didn't even know us. Jacob thought about Martha, who'd spent her last weeks of life making sure everything was in order for him after she was gone. Thought about his boys, who'd held hands while the fever took them because they didn't want to die alone. Sometimes strangers are the only family we get, he said finally. Doesn't make them less important, just makes them different. Eli seemed to consider this. You're a stranger too. I am. But you stopped. I did. Why? It was the same question Clara had asked, and Jacob still didn't have a good answer. Because he'd lost too much already, and couldn't stand to lose more? Because those 8 faces had reminded him of every child he'd failed to save? Because something in Clara's fierce gray eyes had grabbed hold of something in his chest and wouldn't let go? Because I was tired of riding past, he said. Tired of pretending other people's pain wasn't my problem. Tired of being the kind of man who looks away. Eli walked in silence for a while after that. Then, so quietly, Jacob almost missed it. My mama said there were good white folks out there. Said I just had to wait long enough to find them. Your mama was a smart woman. She's dead now. Daddy too. Everyone's dead. I know, son. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. Eli's voice was matter-of-fact, in the way only a child's could be. You didn't kill them. You're just the one who showed up after. They reached the ranch just as darkness was falling. Jacob's legs had gone numb hours ago, and he was pretty sure at least 2 of the children had frostbite on their fingers. But they were alive. All 8 of them, still breathing, still moving, still fighting. Gus met them at the door, his weathered face cycling through surprise, concern, and determination in rapid succession. Madre de Dios, he breathed, taking in the parade of frozen children. Jacob, what in God's name? Found them in an abandoned cabin about 15 miles north. Their whole wagon train died or ran off. They've been alone for weeks. Gus didn't ask any more questions. He simply stepped back and held the door wide open. Come in, little ones, come in. The fire is warm and the stew is hot. His accent thickened with emotion as he ushered them inside. You are safe now. You are all safe. Clara was the last to enter. She'd insisted on walking the final 100 yards, using a stick as a makeshift crutch, refusing to be carried across the threshold like an invalid. Jacob watched her limp into his home, this child who'd been left to die twice over and still hadn't learned to give up. She turned at the doorway and looked at him with those ancient gray eyes. Thank you, she said simply, for stopping. Thank me when you've had something to eat and a good night's sleep. We've still got a long way to go. I know. Clara's gaze swept across the ranch house, taking in the sturdy walls and the roaring fire and the pot of stew bubbling on the stove. But this is more than we've had in a long time. This is a start. Yes, Jacob thought, as he followed her inside and closed the door against the howling wind. This was a start. The question was whether any of them had enough left to see it through to the end. The children gathered around the fire like moths to a flame, their frozen bodies slowly thawing as Gus ladled out bowl after bowl of stew. Most of them ate like they hadn't seen food in weeks, which, Jacob realized, was probably close to the truth. All except Patty. The smallest girl sat motionless, staring at the bowl in her hands like she'd forgotten what to do with it. She hadn't spoken since Jacob found them, hadn't reacted to anything at all. Clara noticed his attention. She stopped talking after her mama died, watched it happen, watched the fever take her whole family, one by one, and she was the only one left. How long ago? 6 weeks, maybe. We've all lost track of time. Clara took a careful spoonful of stew, savoring it like it was the finest meal she'd ever tasted. The doctor on the wagon train said it was shock, said she might start talking again when she felt safe. But I don't think she's felt safe since. Jacob looked at the tiny girl with her empty eyes and untouched bowl. 6 years old and already hollowed out by loss. He knew that feeling, had lived with it for years after Martha and the boys died. "Give her time," he said. "Safety takes a while to believe in." "That's what I keep telling her." Clara glanced at him sideways. "You lost children, didn't you? I can see it in how you look at us." The question should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt like recognition. One broken soul seeing another. Twin boys, Daniel and Thomas. They were 6 when the fever took them.
"Same as Patty."
Same as Patty. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then,
"My parents died when I was 8. Fever got them too. The wagon train was supposed to take me to my aunt in Oregon, but then people started getting sick, and everything fell apart."
"Your leg, were you born with it?"
"Yes."
Clara said it without shame or self-pity, just fact.
"The wagon master said I was slowing everyone down."
Said they couldn't afford to wait for a crippled girl who couldn't walk right. The wagon master was a damn fool. A ghost of a smile touched Clara's lips. "That's what Mrs. Henderson said. She stayed behind with us when everyone else left. Said she'd rather die with children who needed her than live with people who'd abandoned them." Jacob thought about the frozen body, still lying in the snow, waiting for a burial she'd more than earned. She was a good woman. She was the best woman. Clara's voice cracked slightly, the first real emotion she'd shown since the cabin. "She died because of us. Because we weren't worth saving to anyone else." "That's not true."
"Isn't it?"
Clara's gray eyes had gone hard again.
8 children, Mr. McAllister. 2 of us can't walk right, 1 won't speak, and 1 of us has skin that makes people want to hurt him. We're not the kind of orphans anyone wants to adopt.
We're the kind they ship off to workhouses and factories because nobody cares what happens to us. The bitter accuracy of her words hit Jacob like a fist. He'd seen those workhouses. Seen the children who emerged from them, broken in body and spirit. Seen the factories that chewed up young lives and spit out the remains. "You're not going to any workhouse," he said. "None of you."
"How can you promise that? You don't even know us. By tomorrow, you might decide we're too much trouble and send us on our way."
"I won't."
"Everyone says that at first."
Clara set down her bowl, her appetite apparently gone.
"Then they see how much work we are, how much food we eat, how much space we take up. And suddenly, the promises don't matter anymore."
Jacob didn't have an answer for that. She was right to be suspicious, right to doubt his intentions. He was a stranger who'd shown up at the worst moment of her life, and she had no reason to believe he was any different from the others who'd abandoned her. So instead of arguing, he simply said, "Get some sleep, Miss Whitmore. We can talk more in the morning." Clara hesitated, clearly wanting to push further. But exhaustion won out over suspicion, and she finally nodded.
"The other children," she said. "They need proper beds. Patty needs to be somewhere warm, and Eli keeps looking at the door like he's planning to run."
"Gus is setting up the bunkhouse. There are enough beds for everyone."
"I should help."
"You should rest. That leg needs looking at, and you won't do anyone any good if you collapse from exhaustion." Clara opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. For just a moment, she looked like what she was, a frightened 10-year-old girl who'd been carrying the weight of 7 lives on her thin shoulders.
"Okay,"
she said quietly.
"But if anything happens, if anyone needs me, I'll wake you, I promise."
She held his gaze for a long moment, searching for the lie. When she didn't find it, something in her expression shifted. Not trust. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of it.
Good night, Mr. McAllister.
Good night, Miss Whitmore. He watched her limp toward the bunkhouse, that twisted leg dragging through the snow she'd already crossed once today. Tomorrow, he'd need to find her a proper crutch. Tonight, he just needed everyone to survive. Gus appeared at his elbow, having finished settling the younger children.
8 of them, Gus said quietly, and the winter barely half over.
I know.
We barely have enough food for the 2 of us until spring. Now there are 10 mouths to feed.
I know that too.
The town won't like this. A single man taking in children? People will talk.
Jacob turned to face his old friend, his expression set in lines of determination that Gus had seen before, usually right before Jacob did something that would cause them both a world of trouble. Let them talk. Those children needed help. I helped them. Everything else we'll figure out as we go. Gus was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed, the sound carrying years of resignation to Jacob McAllister's particular brand of stubborn righteousness. I'll need to go to town for supplies. More blankets, more food. Medicine if Doc Weatherby has any to spare.
Thank you, Gus.
Don't thank me yet. Gus glanced toward the bunkhouse, where 8 children were settling into beds for the first time in weeks. Those little ones, they're not just hungry and cold. They're broken, Jacob. Some in ways that food and warmth won't fix.
I know.
And that girl, Clara, she's been holding them together through sheer will. When she finally lets go, when she finally lets herself feel everything she's been pushing down.
I know.
Jacob's voice was heavy with understanding. I've been there, remember? After Martha and the boys. You're the one who pulled me back.
That was different. You were a grown man with years of living behind you. These are children who've already seen more death than most adults.
Gus shook his head. I don't know if we can fix what's been broken in them.
Maybe not. But we can give them a place to heal. We can show them that not everyone will abandon them.
Jacob looked up at the night sky, where stars had finally emerged now that the storm had passed.
And maybe, just maybe, we can teach them that being different doesn't mean being worthless.
Gus followed his gaze. You're thinking about more than just food and shelter.
I'm thinking about those factories back east, the ones that buy children from orphan trains and work them until they break.
Jacob's jaw tightened. I'm thinking about every child I've ever heard about who disappeared into those places and never came out. And I'm thinking that if I can save 8 of them from that fate, then maybe all the things I've lost weren't for nothing. The words hung in the cold air between them. Gus didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. He'd known Jacob long enough to recognize when the man had made up his mind. Finally, we're going to need more than good intentions. We're going to need help. I know. Mrs. Caldwell has been looking for a cause to support since her sons died in the war, and Doc Weatherby owes me for that business with the rustlers last fall. And the town council? Sheriff Wade? Jacob's expression darkened at the mention of the sheriff. Marcus Wade had hated him for years, ever since they'd both courted the same woman and Jacob had won. The fact that Martha had died anyway hadn't softened Wade's grudge one bit. The sheriff can go to hell. I've got legal right to take in orphans if I want. Nothing in the territorial law says otherwise. Legal right and community acceptance aren't the same thing. They'll have to be good enough. Jacob turned toward the house, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the miles he'd walked today. Get some sleep, Gus. Tomorrow we start building something new. He paused at the door, looking back at the bunkhouse one more time. Through the window, he could see Clara sitting up in bed, watching over the other children as they slept. Still on guard, still protecting them. She caught his eye and held it for a moment across the darkness. Then, slowly,
She lay down and closed her eyes. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was a start. And sometimes, Jacob thought as he finally went inside, a start was all you needed. The first week passed in a blur of exhaustion and adjustment. Jacob woke before dawn each morning to find Clara already up, checking on the other children, making sure the fire hadn't died overnight, counting heads like she expected someone to have vanished in the darkness. "You don't have to do that anymore," he told her on the third day, finding her limping between beds at 4 a.m. "That's my job now." "Old habits." Clara didn't look at him. "I've been counting heads for 6 weeks. Hard to stop." "Try." She finally met his eyes, and he saw the dark circles beneath them, the tremor in her hands that came from running on fear and willpower for too long. "What if I stop and something happens? What if I let my guard down and someone gets hurt?" "Then we deal with it together. That's what family does." "We're not family. We're strangers you found in the cabin." "Family's got nothing to do with blood, Miss Whitmore. It's got to do with showing up, with staying when things get hard." Jacob crouched down to her level, ignoring the protest in his knees. "I'm not asking you to trust me yet. I'm asking you to rest. Let someone else carry the weight for a while." Clara's lip trembled, just for a second, before she forced it still. "I don't know how." "Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time." She didn't agree, but she also didn't argue when he guided her back to her bed and pulled the blanket up to her chin. And when he checked on her an hour later, she was finally sleeping, her face relaxed for the first time since he'd met her. The other children presented their own challenges. Will, the oldest boy, threw himself into work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He was up before Jacob, chopping wood, feeding animals, mending fences that didn't need mending. Like he was trying to prove something. "You don't have to earn your keep," Jacob told him after finding the boy collapsed from exhaustion in the barn. "You're not a hired hand. You're a child." "I'm 14. Will's voice was defensive. "Old enough to work. Old enough to pull my weight." "Old enough to work, sure, but not old enough to work yourself to death." Jacob sat down on a hay bale, giving Will space. "What are you running from, son?" "I'm not running from anything." "Then what are you running toward?" Will was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "I was supposed to protect them. My pa, before he died, he made me promise. Said I was the man of the family now. Said I had to keep everyone safe." "And you feel like you failed?" "I did fail." Will's hands clenched into fists. "People died. Mrs. Henderson died, and I couldn't do anything to stop it." "Mrs. Henderson died trying to get help for all of you. That wasn't your failure. That was her choice." "I should have gone instead. I'm stronger. I could have made it."
Maybe. Or maybe you would have frozen to death too, and those 7 children would have lost their only protection. Jacob leaned forward. "You kept them alive, Will. For 6 weeks in the worst winter Montana's seen in 20 years, you kept 7 children alive. That's not failure. That's a miracle." Will's shoulders shook, and for a moment, Jacob thought he might cry. But the boy had been holding himself together for too long. The tears wouldn't come. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. "I don't know how to stop," Will admitted. "I don't know how to just be a kid again." "Neither do I." Jacob stood, offering his hand. "But I figure we can learn together. You, me, and all those other children who forgot what childhood feels like." Will took his hand and let himself be pulled to his feet. It wasn't surrender. It was the beginning of trust. Maggie was harder. The 12-year-old with Chinese features and American fury had built walls so high Jacob couldn't see over them. She refused to speak to him directly, refused to acknowledge his presence unless absolutely necessary. and spent most of her time glaring at anyone who came too close. "She's not always like this," Rosie explained one afternoon, her Irish lilt making the words sound almost musical. "Before everything happened, she used to smile. She used to tell jokes and make everyone laugh." "What happened?" Rosie's face darkened. "People happened. The men on the wagon train. They said mean things about her mama. Called her names I'm not supposed to repeat. Said Maggie was an abomination because her blood was mixed." "And Maggie heard all this?" "Maggie heard everything. And when her mama got sick, nobody would help. They said it was God's punishment for her mama's sin." Rosie's eyes filled with tears. Her mama died alone in a tent because nobody would sit with her except Maggie. So now Maggie hates everyone. Jacob absorbed this information with growing anger. He'd seen prejudice before, lived through a war that was supposed to end it, and knew that hatred didn't die just because laws changed. It passed from generation to generation like a disease. He found Maggie behind the barn that evening, throwing rocks at a tree with violent precision. "Good arm," he said, keeping his distance. Maggie didn't respond, just threw another rock, harder this time. "I knew a soldier once who could throw like that. Confederate sniper picked him off at Antietam before he could show the world what he could do with a proper baseball." Still nothing. "Your mama must have been a strong woman, raising a daughter in a world that didn't want her." Maggie's hand froze mid-throw. "Don't talk about my mama." "Why not?" "Because you don't know her. You don't know anything about her." "I know she raised a daughter who protected 7 other children when no one else would. I know she raised someone brave enough to stand up to a stranger twice her size." Jacob took a careful step closer. "I know she'd be proud of you." The rock dropped from Maggie's hand. Her shoulders began to shake. "They let her die." The words came out broken, shattered. "They just let her die because she wasn't good enough for them. Because I wasn't good enough." "Listen to me." Jacob's voice was firm but gentle. "What those people did, what they said, that was about them. Their fear, their hatred, their small-minded cruelty. It had nothing to do with you or your mother." "Then why does it hurt so much?" "Because words have power, especially when they come from people who should know better. But here's the truth, Maggie. The truth they didn't want you to know." He crouched down, meeting her eyes. "You're not an abomination. You're not a mistake. You're a child of 2 cultures, and that makes you twice as strong, twice as valuable, twice as important to this world." Maggie stared at him like he'd spoken in a foreign language.
Nobody's ever said that to me before.
"Then everyone you've met before was a fool." For the first time since Jacob had found them, Maggie's face softened. Not a smile, not yet, but something close. The first crack in walls that had taken years to build. "I still don't trust you," she said. "I know, but maybe you could hate me a little less?" "Maybe." She picked up another rock, tested its weight. "We'll see." Sam was a different kind of challenge. The preacher's son had lost his faith along with his parents, and his skepticism had hardened into something that looked a lot like despair. "There is no God," he announced at dinner one night, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And if there is, he's a monster who enjoys watching children suffer." Gus crossed himself. Rosie gasped. Even Clara looked uncomfortable. But Jacob just set down his fork and met Sam's eyes calmly. "That's a fair conclusion, given what you've been through." Sam blinked, clearly expecting a lecture.
"You're not going to tell me I'm wrong?"
"I'm not going to tell you what to believe. That's between you and whatever you decide is out there." Jacob took a sip of coffee. "But I will say this. The people who hurt you, who left you to die, they didn't do that because of God. They did it because they were weak and scared and selfish. That's not divine will. That's human failure."
My father said everything happened for a reason, that God had a plan.
Maybe he does. Or maybe your father was wrong about some things. Doesn't mean he was wrong about everything. Jacob leaned back in his chair. You can be angry at God, Sam. You can curse him and deny him and refuse to believe he exists. But that anger, it'll eat you alive if you let it. I've seen it happen to better men than either of us.
So what am I supposed to do? Just forgive everyone who hurt us?
Hell no. Forgiveness is earned, not given. But you can choose to live anyway. Choose to find meaning in a world that doesn't always make sense. Jacob gestured at the children around the table. These 7 people right here, they need you. Not a bitter shell of who you used to be. They need Sam, the real one, underneath all that anger. Sam's jaw tightened. The real Sam died with his parents. I don't believe that, and neither do you, or you wouldn't still be fighting so hard. The boy had no response to that. He stared at his plate for a long moment, then picked up his fork and resumed eating. It wasn't resolution, but it was the beginning of a conversation that would continue for months. Ben, the Polish boy, was the easiest of the children to reach. His cheerful exterior had been a shield against grief, but underneath it was a child desperate for normalcy. In my country, he told Jacob one morning, helping feed the chickens, my father was a baker. Best bread in our village. People came from miles to buy from him.
What happened to him?
He died on the ship coming to America. Sickness took many people in the place, below deck, where they put families like mine. Ben's accent thickened with memory. Mama said America would be better, said we would have new life. But then she died too, and I was alone. You're not alone anymore. No. Ben looked up at him with eyes that wanted so desperately to believe. But for how long? Good things don't last. I learned this lesson many times. Maybe this time will be different. Maybe. Ben shrugged with the fatalistic acceptance of someone who'd learned not to hope too hard. Or maybe not. Either way, I help with chickens. Chickens are simple. They don't leave you. Eli was the hardest to read. The 7-year-old former slave's child moved through the ranch like a ghost, always watching, never fully present. He flinched at sudden movements, avoided corners where he could be trapped, and slept with one eye open.
He thinks you're going to sell him, Clara explained quietly one evening. His mama was sold 3 times before the war. He thinks that's what white folks do with children they don't want.
The words hit Jacob like a physical blow. He's not property. He's a child.
I know that. You know that. But he's spent his whole life being told otherwise.
Clara's gray eyes were old beyond their years.
It's going to take more than words to convince him he's safe here.
What will it take?
Time, consistency, proving every single day that you mean what you say.
She paused.
And maybe protecting him from the people in town who see him the same way those wagon train folks saw Maggie.
Jacob thought about Sheriff Wade, about the town council, about all the small-minded people who measured a person's worth by the color of their skin. I'll protect him, all of you, whatever it takes.
That's a big promise, Mr. McAllister.
It's the only kind worth making.
The children began to settle into rhythms. School lessons in the morning, taught by Clara, who had inherited her teacher father's gift for making learning interesting. Chores in the afternoon, distributed according to ability rather than age. Evenings around the fire, where Gus told stories of his life in Mexico, and the children slowly began to share their own. But Patty remained silent. The 6-year-old had not spoken a single word since Jacob found them, and she responded to nothing and no one except Clara, whose hand she held with desperate intensity whenever the older girl was near. "She's in there," Clara insisted when Jacob expressed concern. "I can see it in her eyes.
She's just too scared to come out. What scared her so badly? Death, loss, being completely alone in the world.
Clara's voice was soft. She watched her whole family die, Mr. McAllister. Mother, father, 2 brothers, a baby sister. One by one, over the course of 3 weeks. And nobody held her. Nobody told her it would be okay. She just sat in the corner of that wagon and watched everyone she loved turn into bodies. Jacob's chest tightened. Jesus. By the time we found her, she'd stopped speaking, stopped crying, stopped everything except breathing. Clara looked at the little girl, who was sitting by the fire, staring into the flames with empty eyes. I don't know how to help her. I've tried everything I can think of, and nothing works. Maybe she needs something you can't give her. Like what? Like safety. Real safety. Not just the absence of danger. Jacob watched Patty's small face, looking for any sign of the child she'd been before tragedy had hollowed her out. She needs to believe that the worst is over, that nobody else she loves is going to die. How can anyone promise that? You can't. But you can show her, day after day, that some things last. Some people stay. He turned to Clara. That's what you've been doing for her, isn't it? Staying.
Being the one constant in a world that keeps changing. Clara nodded slowly. I promised her I wouldn't leave. The day we found her, I promised I'd stay with her until she felt safe again. And you kept that promise, even when it meant dragging yourself across a frozen cabin floor to protect her from me. I didn't know you then. No, you didn't. But you protected her anyway. Jacob smiled slightly. That's the kind of love that heals people, Miss Whitmore, even when it takes longer than we wanted to. 2 weeks after their arrival, Gus returned from town with news that made Jacob's stomach drop. People are talking, Gus said quietly, after the children had gone to bed. About you, about the children, about what kind of man takes in 8 orphans in the middle of winter. Let them talk. It's more than talk, Hefe. Sheriff Wade has been asking questions, saying he's concerned about the children's welfare, saying maybe someone should check to make sure they're being properly cared for. Jacob's hands clenched. Wade doesn't give a damn about those children. He just wants to cause me trouble. I know, but he's the law in this territory. If he decides to make an official inquiry, then he'll find 8 children who are fed, clothed, warm, and safe, which is more than they had before I found them. He'll also find a mixed-race girl, a colored boy, and a crippled child in the care of an unmarried man with no legal standing as their guardian. Gus's voice was heavy with worry. In the eyes of some people, that's enough to take them away. Take them where? To an orphanage that'll ship them off to factories? To foster families who see them as free labor? Jacob stood abruptly, pacing the small kitchen. I didn't pull those children out of a frozen cabin just to hand them over to a system that treats them like property. I know, but we need to be careful. Wade is looking for any excuse to move against you, and the town council is nervous about having so many orphans in one place. Gus hesitated. There's something else. What? A man came to town asking about abandoned children. Well-dressed, Eastern accent. Said he represented an organization that places orphans with good families. Jacob went still. What kind of organization? He didn't say, but he had papers, official-looking ones, and he seemed very interested when someone mentioned the children at your ranch. The memory of Clara's words echoed in Jacob's mind. We're not the kind of orphans anyone wants to adopt. We're the kind they ship off to workhouses and factories. Did you get his name? Blackwood. Thaddeus Blackwood. Jacob had never heard the name before, but something about it made his skin crawl.
Men in fine suits didn't come to remote Montana territories out of the goodness of their hearts. They came because there was profit to be made.
"Keep your ears open," he told Gus, "and don't let any of the children go into town without one of us with them." "You think this man is dangerous?" "I think anyone who makes money off orphans isn't someone I want anywhere near those kids." He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in the kitchen with his rifle across his lap, watching the snow fall outside the window, and thinking about all the ways the world could take away everything he was trying to build. The children trusted him now. Not completely. Not yet. But enough to let their guards down. Enough to laugh at Gus's jokes and ask questions about the ranch, and start talking about what they wanted to be when they grew up. Clara wanted to teach, like her father. Will wanted to raise horses. Maggie wanted to open a restaurant that served food from both her cultures. Sam wanted to write books that told the truth about the world, even when the truth was ugly. Even Eli had started to talk about the future, hesitantly, like he was testing whether hope was safe enough to feel. And now some stranger in a fancy suit was asking questions about them. Some organization that placed orphans with families, which almost certainly meant selling them to whoever would pay. Not while I'm breathing, Jacob thought. Not while there's a single breath left in my body. He checked on the children at midnight, moving quietly between beds. Will slept with his fists clenched, still fighting even in his dreams. Maggie had kicked off her covers and lay sprawled like she was ready to spring up at the first sign of danger. Sam was curled into a ball, making himself as small as possible. Ben snored softly, a sound that made Rosie giggle every morning. Eli had positioned himself closest to the door, his eyes flickering open briefly when Jacob entered, before closing again when he recognized who it was. Clara lay awake, watching him with those ancient gray eyes.
"Something's wrong," she whispered. "I can tell."
"Nothing for you to worry about."
"Mr. McAllister," her voice was firm despite its softness, "I've been responsible for these children for 6 weeks. I've kept them alive through blizzards and starvation and people who wanted to hurt us. Whatever you're worried about, I deserve to know."
He hesitated. She was 10 years old. 10 years old with a twisted leg and more burdens than most adults could carry. The last thing he wanted was to add another weight to her shoulders. But she was also right. These children were her family, in a way they weren't yet his. She'd earned the right to know what threatened them. "There's a man in town," he said quietly, "asking about orphans. The kind of man who might try to take you somewhere you don't want to go." Clara's face went pale, but her voice stayed steady. "A factory man?" "Maybe. I don't know yet."
"What are you going to do?"
"Whatever I have to." He crouched beside her bed. "But I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If anything happens to me, if I'm not here to protect you, take the others and run. Gus knows places you can hide, places no one will find you."
"Nothing's going to happen to you."
"Maybe not, but if it does, I need to know you'll keep them safe." Clara's gray eyes held his for a long moment. Then she nodded.
"I'll keep them safe. I promise."
"Good girl." He stood, adjusting her blanket. "Now get some sleep. Tomorrow's another day." He was almost to the door when her voice stopped him.
"Mr. McAllister?"
"Yes?"
"Thank you for telling me the truth."
A pause.
"For treating me like I matter."
"You do matter, Clara. More than you know." He left before she could respond, closing the door softly behind him. In the kitchen, Gus was waiting with fresh coffee and a worried expression. "You told her." "She deserved to know. She's a child. She's a child who's been keeping 7 other children alive through sheer force of will. She's a child who crawled across a frozen floor to protect them from a stranger 3 times her size. She's a child who deserves to be treated like the warrior she is. Gus sighed. You're right. I know you're right. But I don't like it. Neither do I. Jacob accepted the coffee, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. But that's the world we live in. A world where children have to be warriors just to survive. Then maybe it's time to change the world. That's exactly what we're going to do, old friend. One child at a time. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering everything in white. And somewhere in the darkness, Thaddeus Blackwood was making plans that would test everything Jacob McAllister believed about family, protection, and the lengths a man would go to save the children he'd come to love. Thaddeus Blackwood came to the ranch 3 days later, riding in a fine buggy that looked absurdly out of place against the snow-covered Montana wilderness. He wore a black coat that cost more than most ranchers made in a year, and his smile had the practiced warmth of a man who'd learned to fake sincerity. Jacob met him in the yard, rifle in hand, but not raised. Not yet. Mr. McAllister, I presume. Blackwood stepped down from the buggy, brushing invisible dust from his sleeves. I've heard quite a lot about you. Can't say the same. What brings you to my ranch? Concern, Mr. McAllister. Pure humanitarian concern. Blackwood's eyes scanned the property, lingering on the bunkhouse where the children were hidden. Word has reached my organization that you've taken in a number of orphaned children. Admirable, truly admirable. But I must ask, are you equipped to provide for them properly? They're fed, they're warm, they're safe. That's more than they had before. Of course. But surely you understand that children need more than basic survival. They need education, structure, the guidance of proper institutions designed for their care. Blackwood pulled a leather folder from his coat. I represent the Eastern Children's Aid Society. We specialize in placing orphans with suitable families who can provide everything they need. Suitable families. Families who have been thoroughly vetted. Families with resources and stability. Blackwood opened the folder, revealing official-looking documents covered in stamps and signatures. We've placed over 3,000 children in the past 5 years alone, given them opportunities they never would have had otherwise. Jacob didn't move. What kind of opportunities? Employment, training, the chance to become productive members of society. Blackwood's smile never wavered. Many of our children go on to work in manufacturing, textiles, various industries that are always in need of eager young hands. There it was, the truth beneath the polished words. Eager young hands. Children sold into factory labor, worked until they broke, discarded when they were no longer useful. I think you should leave now, Mr. Blackwood. I understand your hesitation. Truly, I do. You've grown attached to these children. That's natural. Blackwood stepped closer, lowering his voice. But consider their futures, Mr. McAllister. What can you offer them here? A life of ranching? Manual labor? Limited prospects in a remote territory? I can offer them a home, a family, people who give a damn whether they live or die. Sentiment is admirable, but it doesn't fill bellies or build futures. Blackwood tucked the folder back into his coat. I'll leave you my card. When you realize you're in over your head, and you will, please don't hesitate to contact me. The offer will remain open. He climbed back into his buggy, but paused before taking the reins. One more thing, Mr. McAllister. I notice some of the children you've taken in are rather unusual. A mixed-race girl, a colored boy, a cripple. His smile turned cold. These children are particularly difficult to place with traditional families. They tend to end up in less desirable situations. Factories, workhouses,
institutions that aren't as particular about the condition of their charges. Is that a threat? Merely an observation. Good day, Mr. McAllister. Jacob watched the buggy disappear down the road, his hands shaking with barely contained rage. When he turned back toward the house, Clara was standing on the porch, her face pale. "He's going to try to take us," she said. It wasn't a question. He's going to try. He's not going to succeed. "How can you be sure?" "Because I won't let him." Jacob climbed the porch steps and put his hand on her shoulder. "I promised you a home, Clara. I meant it." "He mentioned Maggie and Eli and me specifically." Clara's voice trembled slightly. "The ones nobody wants. The ones they can sell without anyone caring." "He's wrong about that too. People care. I care. Gus cares. And we're going to fight for every single one of you." That evening, Jacob called a family meeting. All 8 children gathered around the kitchen table, their faces ranging from curious to terrified. Gus stood by the door, arms crossed, his expression grim. "I'm not going to lie to you," Jacob began. "There's a man in town who wants to take you away. He says he's going to place you with families, but the truth is, he's going to sell you to factories back east. Places where children work 16-hour days until they can't work anymore." Maggie's face hardened. "I knew it. I knew this was too good to last." "Let me finish." Jacob held up his hand. "He's going to try. But trying and succeeding are 2 different things. I've got friends in this territory, people who owe me favors. And I've got legal standing to keep you here, as long as I can prove you're being properly cared for." "What if he brings the law?" Will asked. "What if the sheriff comes?" "Then we deal with the sheriff, one problem at a time." "The sheriff hates you." Sam's voice was flat. "Everyone in town knows that. He'll side with Blackwood just to hurt you." "Probably, but hatred and legal authority aren't the same thing. Wade can make trouble, but he can't just take you without cause." "What about papers?" Clara asked. "Official documents giving you the right to keep us." "That's exactly what I'm working on. I've sent word to a lawyer in Helena, man named Warren, supposed to be good with custody cases. He's going to help us file for legal guardianship." "All 8 of us?" Rosie's voice was small and hopeful. "All 8 of you, properly documented, legally protected." Jacob looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. "But I need something from you in return." "What?" Maggie asked suspiciously. "I need you to trust me. Not blindly, not foolishly, but enough to let me handle this. I need you to stay together, stay on the ranch, and not do anything that gives Blackwood or Wade an excuse to separate you." The children exchanged glances. Silent communication passed between them, the kind that came from months of depending on each other for survival. Finally, Clara spoke. "We'll trust you. But if you break that trust, if you give us any reason to think you're not who you say you are, we disappear. All of us. Together." "Fair enough. And we want to help. We're not just going to sit here and wait for someone to save us. We've been saving ourselves for too long to stop now." Jacob nodded slowly. "What did you have in mind?" "Information. Blackwood isn't the only one who can ask questions." Clara's gray eyes gleamed with determination. "Rosie remembers everything she hears. Sam can read and write better than most adults. Will knows how to move without being seen. And Maggie has a way of making people underestimate her. You want to spy on Blackwood. I want to know what we're up against. Don't you?" Jacob considered it. Every instinct screamed that he should protect these children, keep them safe on the ranch, handle the threat himself. But Clara was right. They weren't helpless victims waiting to be rescued. They were survivors who'd kept themselves alive against impossible odds. Gus goes with you. Anywhere in town, anytime, he's there. And if anything feels wrong, you get out immediately. Agreed? Clara nodded. Agreed. The next morning, Gus took Clara, Will, and Sam into town on the pretense of buying supplies. Jacob stayed at the ranch with the younger children, trying to maintain normalcy while his mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Maggie found him in the barn, aggressively mending a harness that didn't need mending. "You're scared," she said. "I'm careful. There's a difference." "No, you're scared. I can tell." She leaned against the stall door, studying him with those sharp, dark eyes. "You really do care about us, don't you? It's not just obligation or charity." "Would it matter if it was?" "It would matter to me." Maggie was quiet for a moment. "My father was a white man, a miner who fell in love with a Chinese laundry woman. Everyone told him he was crazy, told him no good could come from mixing bloodlines. But he didn't care. He loved her anyway." "He sounds like a good man." "He was. And when people said cruel things about me, about what I was, he would get this look in his eyes, like he wanted to fight the whole world." Maggie's voice softened. "You get that same look when Blackwood talks about selling us to factories." "That's because I do want to fight the whole world, or at least the parts of it that think children are property." "Why? We're nothing to you." "Strangers you found in a cabin. You were strangers. Now you're family." Jacob set down the harness and faced her fully. "I know that doesn't make sense to you yet. I know you've been hurt too many times to believe anyone could care without wanting something in return. But I'm going to keep showing up, Maggie, every single day, until you believe it." Maggie's eyes shimmered with tears she wouldn't let fall. "And if I never believe it?" "Then I'll keep showing up anyway. That's what family does." She didn't respond, but when she left the barn, her shoulders weren't quite as rigid as they'd been when she entered. The town expedition yielded valuable information. Clara returned with mental notes that she wrote down immediately, her handwriting cramped but legible. "Blackwood is staying at the boarding house. He's been there for a week, asking questions about every orphan in the territory." She showed Jacob her notes. "He's already taken 3 children from other families, paid their guardians to give them up." "Paid them?" $20 per child. More for healthy ones who can work hard." Clara's jaw tightened. "He offered Mrs. Henley $50 for her nephew because the boy is strong and doesn't complain." "Did she take it?" "Not yet, but she's thinking about it. I could see it in her eyes." Jacob felt sick. $50 was more than many families saw in a year. The temptation would be overwhelming for people already struggling to survive. "What about the sheriff?" "He's definitely working with Blackwood." Sam spoke up, his voice bitter. "We saw them drinking together at the saloon, laughing about something. When they noticed us watching, Wade gave us this look like we were livestock he was sizing up for market." "He mentioned you specifically," Will added. "Said something about how you couldn't keep 8 children hidden forever. How eventually you'd slip up, and when you did, he'd be ready." So it was personal. Wade wasn't just helping Blackwood out of greed or corruption. He was using this situation to finally destroy the man he'd hated for 20 years. "There's something else." Clara hesitated, clearly uncertain whether to share the next piece of information. "What?" "Blackwood has a partner. Someone in Helena who handles the legal side of things. They've done this before, in other territories. Found orphans, manufactured custody claims, shipped children east by the trainload." "How do you know this?" "I talked to a woman at the general store. Her sister in Wyoming lost 2 children to the same organization 3 years ago. She's been trying to fight them ever since,
but they've got lawyers and money and connections she can't match. Jacob absorbed this information with growing dread. This wasn't just one man pursuing easy prey. This was an operation. Systematic, organized, practiced at taking children and making them disappear.
Did she give you a name, the woman with the sister?
Mrs. Harriet Caldwell. She lives on the big ranch east of town. Jacob knew that name. Harriet Caldwell was the wealthiest widow in the territory, a woman who'd lost her husband and 3 sons to war and disease, but had refused to be broken by grief. She was also one of the few people in Silver Creek who'd never seemed to care about Jacob's past or his ongoing feud with the sheriff. "I need to talk to her," he said. "If she's been fighting Blackwood's organization, she might know their weaknesses." "She said she'd be willing to meet. Tomorrow afternoon, if you can make it." "I'll make it." That night, Jacob sat with the younger children while Gus prepared dinner. Ben was teaching Rosie a Polish folk song, their voices blending in a way that made the old ranch house feel almost cheerful. Eli sat in the corner, still wary, but his eyes followed the singing with something that might have been longing.
Patty sat beside Jacob, her small hand resting on his knee.
She still hadn't spoken, but she'd started touching people, started reaching out for connection in the only way she could manage. "You're safe here," Jacob murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "Whatever happens, you're safe." She didn't respond, but her fingers curled around his, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting beneath her feet. Mrs. Harriet Caldwell received Jacob in a sitting room that spoke of old money and refined taste. She was perhaps 60, with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much but refused to look away. "Mr. McAllister, I've heard a great deal about you. Most of it unflattering, I imagine." "On the contrary, Sheriff Wade has been trying to destroy your reputation for years, which tells me you must be doing something right." She gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss."
Jacob sat, feeling slightly out of place in the elegant surroundings. "Your sister in Wyoming. Clara said she lost children to Blackwood's organization."
2 nephews, taken under the pretense of finding them suitable homes. We later learned they were shipped to a textile mill in Massachusetts. One died in a factory fire. The other escaped and eventually made his way back, but he was broken, scarred in body and spirit. Mrs. Caldwell's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "He hanged himself 6 months later." "I'm sorry." "So am I. Sorry and angry, and determined to ensure it doesn't happen to anyone else." She leaned forward. "I've been fighting Blackwood and his partners for 3 years, Mr. McAllister. I've hired lawyers, investigators, journalists. I've accumulated evidence of their crimes, testimony from survivors, financial records showing how much they profit from each child they sell."
"Why haven't you stopped them?"
"Because they have protection.
Powerful men in Washington who benefit from cheap child labor. Judges who rule in their favor regardless of evidence. And local law enforcement who are either bribed or threatened into compliance." Her eyes met his.
Sheriff Wade has been receiving payments from Blackwood's organization for over a year. $20 a month, deposited into an account in Helena.
"You have proof of this?"
"I have proof of many things. What I don't have is someone willing to act on it." She stood, moving to a desk in the corner. "The territorial governor is an honest man, but he's in Helena, and by the time word reaches him, children have already been shipped east. The federal marshals are spread too thin to investigate every suspicious custody transfer, and the newspapers are reluctant to print stories that might anger their wealthy advertisers."
"So what do you suggest?"
Mrs. Caldwell returned with a thick folder. "I suggest we make it impossible for Blackwood to operate here."
"Legally, publicly, and if necessary, by force." What's in that folder? Everything I've gathered over 3 years. Testimony, photographs, financial records. Enough to destroy Blackwood's reputation and possibly send him to prison, if we can get it in front of the right people. And who are the right people? There's a federal prosecutor in Denver who's been building a case against child trafficking operations in the Western Territories. His name is Daniel Warren. He's the one who helped my family try to recover my nephews, even though we ultimately failed. Mrs. Caldwell handed him the folder. If you can get this evidence to him, along with your testimony about Blackwood's activities here, it might be enough to finally bring the organization down. Jacob took the folder, feeling its weight. 3 years of work. Grief transformed into determination. A woman who'd lost everything, fighting to save children she'd never meet.
Why are you trusting me with this? Because you're the only one who's taken action. The only one who looked at 8 abandoned children and saw human beings worth saving instead of problems to be managed. Mrs. Caldwell's voice softened. And because my sons would have been about your age if they'd lived. I'd like to think they would have been the kind of men who stopped for children in need. Jacob stood, tucking the folder inside his coat. I'll get this to Warren, whatever it takes. Be careful. Blackwood has already realized you're a threat. He'll be watching you, looking for any weakness to exploit. He won't find one. Everyone has weaknesses, Mr. McAllister. The trick is not letting your enemies discover them before you discover theirs. Jacob was halfway home when he saw the smoke, black and thick, rising from the direction of his ranch. He spurred Soldier into a gallop, his heart pounding with terror. The barn was on fire. Flames licked up the walls, fed by the dry hay stored inside. And standing in the yard, surrounded by armed men, were the children. All 8 of them, huddled together, with Gus held at gunpoint beside them. Sheriff Wade stepped forward, a document in his hand and a triumphant smile on his face. Jacob McAllister, by authority of the Territorial Court, I'm here to take custody of these children pending investigation into their welfare. You can cooperate or you can resist. Either way, they're coming with me. Clara caught Jacob's eye across the chaos. Her face was pale, but determined. She gave the slightest shake of her head. Don't fight. Not yet. Not like this. Jacob dismounted slowly, his hands visible, his mind racing through options. 8 children. 6 armed men. Gus disarmed and helpless. The folder from Mrs. Caldwell burning a hole in his coat. On what grounds? He asked, keeping his voice calm. Concerns about the children's living conditions, reports of inadequate food, shelter, and supervision. Wade's smile widened. The court has determined they'd be better served in the care of a proper institution while the investigation proceeds. What institution? Mr. Blackwood's organization has generously offered to house them temporarily. All expenses paid. Jacob looked at the children. At Clara, who was already calculating escape routes. At Will, whose fists were clenched despite the guns pointed at him. At Maggie, whose dark eyes burned with fury. At the younger ones, terrified but trusting their older companions to know what to do. And at Patty, who stood slightly apart from the group, staring at the fire with an expression of absolute terror. Something in her finally broke. She opened her mouth, and for the first time in months, she screamed. The sound that came from Patty's throat was unlike anything Jacob had ever heard. Not just a scream, but a release of everything she'd been holding inside for months. Grief, terror, rage. It poured out of her small body in waves that made even the armed men step back. Clara moved instantly, dropping to her knees and pulling Patty into her arms. "It's okay. It's okay. I'm here. I'm not leaving you." But Patty kept screaming, her eyes fixed on the flames consuming the barn.
seeing something none of them could see. Her family dying, her world ending. Everything she'd tried so hard to forget, coming back in a rush of fire and smoke. "Shut that child up!" Wade's voice was sharp with irritation. "This is a legal proceeding." "She's terrified, you heartless bastard." Jacob stepped between the sheriff and the children. "She watched her entire family die. Fire is what killed them." "Not my concern. The court order is clear. These children are to be transferred to Mr. Blackwood's custody immediately." "Over my dead body." "That can be arranged." Wade's hand moved to his holster. "You're interfering with official business, McAllister. I've got 6 witnesses who'll testify you resisted arrest, and I've got evidence that you've been taking bribes from Blackwood's organization for over a year." Jacob didn't move, didn't blink. $20 a month, deposited into an account in Helena. "Want me to continue?" Something flickered across Wade's face. Fear, quickly masked by anger. "That's a lie." "Is it? I've got bank records, testimony, a folder full of proof that you've been selling children for profit." Jacob's voice carried across the yard, loud enough for everyone to hear. "How do you think the territorial governor will react when he sees it? How do you think the newspapers will react?" The armed men exchanged uncertain glances. They'd signed up to intimidate a rancher and collect some orphans, not to be part of a scandal that could bring down the local sheriff. "He's bluffing," Wade said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Am I? Try me." The standoff stretched for what felt like hours. Patty's screams had subsided into whimpers, muffled against Clara's shoulder. The other children stood frozen, watching the confrontation with wide eyes. Then a new voice cut through the tension. "What in God's name is happening here?" Everyone turned to see Mrs. Harriet Caldwell riding up with 3 men Jacob recognized as her ranch hands. Behind them came Doc Weatherby in his worn buggy, and Reverend Crane on horseback. "Mrs. Caldwell," Wade's attempt at authority sounded hollow. "This is official sheriff's business." "Official business that involves burning down a man's barn and terrorizing children?" Mrs. Caldwell dismounted, her eyes sweeping the scene with barely contained fury. "I've known you for 20 years, Marcus Wade. I knew you were petty, and I knew you held grudges, but I never thought you'd sink to child trafficking." "I'm not trafficking anyone. I'm executing a court order." "A court order obtained through fraud and bribery." Mrs. Caldwell pulled a folded paper from her coat. "I sent a telegram to Judge Morrison in Helena this morning, explaining the situation. He's issued a stay on all custody transfers pending investigation. Your court order is worthless." Wade's face went white. "You can't do that." "I just did. And I've also sent word to Federal Prosecutor Warren in Denver. He should be arriving by train within the week." She turned to the armed men. "I suggest you gentlemen leave now, before you find yourselves implicated in crimes that carry very serious consequences." One by one, the men lowered their weapons. One by one, they mounted their horses and rode away. Within minutes, only Wade remained, standing alone in the yard with his authority crumbling around him. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice was the voice of a defeated man. "No, it isn't." Jacob stepped closer, his voice dropping to a murmur only Wade could hear. "But when it is over, you're going to wish you'd never touched these children. You're going to wish you'd stayed out of my way and let me raise them in peace. Because I'm going to destroy you, Marcus. Not with fists or guns, with the truth. And the truth is going to follow you for the rest of your miserable life." Wade mounted his horse and rode away without another word. Jacob watched him go, then turned to face the chaos he'd left behind. The barn was a loss. The flames had consumed everything inside, including the winter hay supply and most of his tools. It would take months to rebuild, money he didn't have.
But the children were safe. All 8 of them, still huddled together, still watching him with a mixture of fear and hope. "Mr. McAllister," Clara's voice was hoarse from trying to calm Patty. "What happens now?" "Now we put out what's left of that fire, and we figure out how to get through the rest of winter without a barn." Jacob looked at each child in turn.
"And we wait for the cavalry to arrive." "Cavalry?" "Federal Prosecutor Warren. Mrs. Caldwell's evidence. The truth." He crouched down to Clara's level. "Blackwood isn't going to stop. Neither is Wade. But now they're fighting on 2 fronts, and they don't even know it." The next few days were a blur of activity. Neighbors Jacob barely knew showed up with supplies, tools, and offers of help. It turned out that Wade wasn't as popular as he thought, and word of what he'd tried to do spread through the territory like wildfire. Doc Weatherby examined each of the children, pronouncing them healthier than he'd expected, given what they'd been through. He spent extra time with Patty, who had retreated back into silence after her screaming episode. "She spoke," he told Jacob privately. "Not words, but sound. That's progress. Something broke through, even if it was just fear. Will she be okay?" "I don't know. Trauma like hers takes years to heal, if it ever does." Doc Weatherby sighed. "But she's better off here than in any institution I've ever seen. She's got people who care about her. That matters more than medicine sometimes." Mrs. Caldwell became a regular presence at the ranch, organizing relief efforts and coordinating with her contacts in Helena. She and Clara developed an unlikely friendship, the wealthy widow and the crippled orphan, united by their determination and their refusal to be underestimated. "She reminds me of my daughter," Mrs. Caldwell confided to Jacob one evening, "the one who died in childbirth 20 years ago. Same fire in her eyes, same stubborn set to her jaw. Clara's special. They all are. Every one of those children has survived things that would break most adults." She looked at him directly. "You're doing a good thing here, Jacob. A hard thing, but a good one." "It doesn't feel good. It feels like barely holding on." "That's what good things feel like sometimes. The easy path is rarely the right one." Federal Prosecutor Daniel Warren arrived on a Thursday, accompanied by 2 federal marshals and a stenographer. He was younger than Jacob expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and a reputation for taking down corrupt officials. "Mr. McAllister," he shook Jacob's hand firmly, "Mrs. Caldwell speaks very highly of you. She's been fighting this battle longer than I have. I'm just the one who got lucky." "Lucky?" Warren raised an eyebrow. "You found 8 starving children in a blizzard, took them in despite having no resources or legal standing, and then stood down an armed sheriff who was trying to sell them to a child trafficker. That's not luck. That's courage. It's stubbornness, mostly. Same thing in my experience." Warren pulled out a notebook. "I need to interview each of the children, with your permission. Their testimony is crucial to building the case against Blackwood and his organization. They've been through a lot. I don't want them traumatized further." "Neither do I. I'll be gentle, I promise. And they can stop at any time if it becomes too much." Warren's expression softened. "I've done this before, Mr. McAllister. I know how to talk to children who've been hurt." The interviews took 3 days. Warren spoke to each child individually, with Jacob or Gus present as a comfort. He asked about the wagon train, the abandonment, the deaths they'd witnessed. He asked about Blackwood's visit, about Wade's raid, about the fire. Clara's interview lasted the longest. She answered every question with the same steady composure she'd shown since the cabin, recounting horrors in a matter-of-fact tone that made Warren's stenographer weep. "You're very brave," Warren told her at the end. "I've interviewed adults who couldn't describe what you've just told me." "I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being scared."
That's what bravery is, Miss Whitmore. Being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway. Maggie's interview was different.
She was hostile at first, suspicious of this well-dressed stranger asking questions. But when Warren mentioned that his own mother had been Chinese, that he understood what it felt like to be judged for the blood in your veins, something shifted.
They called my mama a whore, Maggie said quietly. Said she seduced my father with oriental tricks. Said I was an abomination that should never have been born.
They were wrong, about all of it.
I know they were wrong, but knowing doesn't make it stop hurting.
No, it doesn't. But sometimes you can use that hurt. Turn it into fuel for fighting back. Warren leaned forward. The men who said those things, who treated your mother like less than human, they're the same kind of men who run factories where children die. The same kind of men who think some lives are worth less than others. You can help me stop them, Maggie. Your testimony can put Blackwood in prison.
Will it bring my mama back?
No, but it might save other children from losing their mamas the same way. Maggie was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded.
Tell me what you need to know.
Eli's interview was the hardest. The 7-year-old had barely spoken to Warren, answering questions with nods or single words. His distrust of authority ran too deep to overcome with gentle questions. But then Warren did something unexpected. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a series of scars on his forearm. You see these? I got them when I was about your age. From a man who thought he owned me because he owned my mother. Warren's voice was steady. I know what it's like to be scared of people who have power over you. I know what it's like to wonder if anyone will ever see you as a person instead of property. Eli stared at the scars.
You were a slave?
My mother was. I was born free, technically, but freedom didn't mean much when the wrong people decided it shouldn't. Warren rolled his sleeve back down. I became a prosecutor because I wanted to put men like that in prison. Men who think they can buy and sell human beings. Men like Blackwood. Can you really stop them? I can try. But I need your help. I need you to tell me what you saw, what you heard. Your voice matters, Eli, more than you know. For the first time since Jacob had found him, Eli talked. Really talked. About the fear, about the running, about the endless uncertainty of never knowing if today was the day someone would decide you weren't worth keeping. Warren wrote it all down, his expression carefully neutral, his eyes bright with suppressed emotion. The interviews yielded enough testimony to file charges against both Blackwood and Wade. Combined with Mrs. Caldwell's financial records and the statements from other families who'd lost children, Warren had built a case that could bring down the entire organization. It's going to take time, he warned Jacob. Trials don't happen overnight. Blackwood has lawyers, connections, money. He'll fight every step of the way. What about the children in the meantime? They stay with you. I've already filed for emergency guardianship on your behalf. Given the circumstances, any judge with a conscience will approve it. And if the judge doesn't have a conscience? Warren smiled grimly. Then we appeal, and we keep appealing until we find one who does. The night before Warren left for Denver, Jacob found Clara sitting on the porch, staring at the stars. The cold had broken slightly, and the air smelled of approaching spring. Can't sleep? He asked, settling beside her. Thinking too much. About what happens next. What do you want to happen next? Clara was quiet for a moment. I want to stop being scared. I want to wake up one morning and not immediately count heads to make sure everyone's still there. I want to believe that this is real, that it's going to last. It's going to last, Clara. I promise. You can't promise that. Nobody can promise that. You're right. I can't guarantee the future. Can't guarantee that bad things won't happen, that there won't be more fights to win.
Jacob looked at her profile, so young and so old at the same time. But I can promise that whatever comes, you won't face it alone. I can promise that I'll be here, fighting beside you, for as long as I'm breathing. Why? Why do you care so much about children you didn't know existed a month ago? The question deserved an honest answer. Jacob thought about it, searching for words that wouldn't sound hollow. Because my boys died and I couldn't save them. Because my wife died and I couldn't save her. Because I spent years after that just existing, going through the motions, letting grief eat me alive. He took a breath. And then I found you. 8 children who needed someone to fight for them. 8 reasons to wake up in the morning and do more than just survive. We saved you. Yeah, I guess you did. Clara leaned against his shoulder, a gesture of trust that meant more than any words. I'm glad you stopped that day, on the road. I'm glad you didn't ride past. So am I, Clara. So am I. They sat together until the cold drove them inside, 2 broken people finding healing in each other's presence. And somewhere in the bunkhouse, 7 other children slept peacefully, safe for the first time in months. The telegram arrived 3 weeks later. Warren had secured an indictment against Blackwood on charges of child trafficking, fraud, and conspiracy. Wade had been arrested by federal marshals and was awaiting trial in Helena. It's happening, Clara said, reading the telegram over Jacob's shoulder. They're actually going to pay for what they did. Looks that way. What about the other children, the ones Blackwood already took? Warren's people are tracking them down. Some have been found in factories back east. Others are still missing. Jacob's voice was heavy. We can't save everyone, Clara, but we can save some. And that has to be enough. It's not enough. It'll never be enough. Clara's jaw tightened. But it's a start. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Patty, who had returned to silence after her screaming episode, walked up to Jacob while he was mending a fence and tugged on his sleeve. He looked down at her small face, those empty eyes that had begun to show flickers of something like life. Safe, she whispered. Her voice was rusty from disuse, barely audible. You made us safe. Then she wrapped her arms around his legs and held on like she'd never let go. Jacob felt tears burn in his eyes. He crouched down and hugged her back, this tiny girl who'd finally found words again. Yeah, sweetheart, you're safe. You're all safe. When he looked up, Clara was watching from the porch. She was smiling, really smiling, for the first time since he'd met her. And in that moment, Jacob knew that everything he'd risked, everything he'd fought for, had been worth it. Not because he'd defeated Blackwood or brought down Wade, but because one little girl had finally found her voice again. That was victory. That was redemption. That was what family meant. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Jacob made the journey to Helena twice to testify, leaving Gus and Mrs. Caldwell to watch over the children. Each time he returned, Clara met him at the gate with the same question in her eyes. Blackwood got 20 years, he told her after the final verdict. Federal prison, no parole. Clara let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for months. And Wade? 15 years. Plus he lost everything. His badge, his reputation, his property. Jacob dismounted, his bones aching from the long ride. Warren says it's one of the biggest child trafficking convictions in territorial history. Is it over? Really over? The legal part, yes. The rest... Jacob looked toward the bunkhouse, where 7 other children were waiting for news. The rest takes longer. Spring came slowly to Montana that year, but when it finally arrived, it transformed the ranch. The children threw themselves into rebuilding what the fire had destroyed. Will organized work crews with military precision. Maggie discovered a talent for carpentry that surprised everyone, including herself. Even Eli began to participate, his wariness gradually giving way to something that looked like belonging. The new barn went up in 3 weeks, built with lumber donated by neighbors and labor provided by half the territory. People Jacob had never met showed up with tools and supplies, drawn by the story that had spread far beyond Silver Creek. "Didn't know you had so many friends," Gus observed one evening, watching the last of the volunteers ride away. "Neither did I. They're not here for you, Hef. They're here for the children. For what they represent."
What do they represent? Gus smiled.
Hope. The idea that even in a hard world, good things can happen. That strangers can become family, and broken things can be mended. The guardianship papers arrived in June, officially recognizing Jacob as the legal guardian of all 8 children. Clara insisted on being present when he signed them, watching each stroke of the pen like it was a sacred ritual. "It's real now," she said when he finished. "Legal. Permanent." "It was always real, Clara. The papers just make it official." "No, before it was just promises. Words that could be broken." She touched the documents with something like reverence. "This is different. This means something." "What does it mean to you?" "It means I can finally stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. Stop expecting you to change your mind, or get tired of us, or decide we're too much trouble." Clara's gray eyes met his. "It means I can start believing in tomorrow." The children adapted to their new life in different ways and at different speeds. Will gradually learned to stop working himself to exhaustion, though he still woke before dawn most mornings out of habit. He'd found a passion for horses, spending hours with the animals, learning to train them with patience instead of force. "You've got a gift," Jacob told him one afternoon, watching the boy gentle a nervous mare. "Could make a living at this, if you wanted." "Maybe." Will stroked the mare's neck. "Or maybe I'll stay here, help you run this place." "You don't have to decide now. You've got years to figure out what you want." "I know what I want." Will looked at Jacob with eyes that had finally started to show his true age instead of decades beyond it. "I want to help other kids, the way you helped us. Build something that lasts." Maggie's transformation was slower, but no less profound. Her anger didn't disappear, but it found new channels. She became fiercely protective of the younger children, channeling the rage that had once been turned inward into advocacy for those who couldn't fight for themselves. "I'm going to be a lawyer," she announced one day, completely out of nowhere. "A lawyer?" Jacob couldn't hide his surprise. "Like Mr. Warren, someone who uses words and laws to fight instead of fists." Her dark eyes gleamed with determination. "Someone who makes sure what happened to us never happens to anyone else." "That's a big dream." "I've got big anger. Might as well use it for something." Sam's skepticism softened into something more nuanced. He still questioned everything, still refused easy answers, but his doubt had lost its bitter edge. He started writing, filling journals with observations and stories and questions that had no answers. "What are you working on?" Clara asked him one evening, finding him scribbling by lamplight. "Everything. Nothing. I don't know yet." Sam looked up, his expression uncertain. "I keep thinking about all the children we'll never know about. The ones who didn't get found. The ones who disappeared into factories and never came out. That's dark. It's true. And someone needs to write it down. Someone needs to make sure people remember. Why you?" "Because I survived. Because I can." Sam's voice steadied. "My father used to say that bearing witness was sacred work. I thought he was just talking about God. But maybe he meant something bigger. Maybe bearing witness means making sure the truth doesn't get lost." Ben remained the heart of the group, his cheerful nature a counterbalance to the heavier personalities around him. He learned English rapidly, his Polish accent fading as the months passed.
though he kept certain words and phrases as connections to his heritage. "My father would like you," he told Jacob one day, helping feed the chickens.
He always said, "Good man is not one who never falls, but one who keeps standing back up." Your father sounds wise. He was. Ben's smile flickered with old sadness. I miss him every day. But missing him is different now. Before, it hurt like a knife in chest. Now, it hurts like old bruise. Still there, but not so sharp. That's called healing, son. Yes, healing. Ben nodded slowly. This is good word. Hard word, but good. Rosie flourished in ways no one expected. Her gift for storytelling, which had sustained the children through their darkest days, blossomed into something extraordinary. She began writing down the tales she'd told, creating books illustrated with pictures she drew herself. "These are beautiful," Mrs. Caldwell said, examining the handmade volumes during one of her visits. "Have you thought about getting them published?" Rosie's eyes went wide. "Published? Like real books?" "Why not? I have connections with a printing press in Boston. They're always looking for fresh voices, especially stories that speak to children. But I'm just a girl from a wagon train. Nobody wants to hear my stories." "Everyone wants to hear your stories, Rosie. They just don't know it yet." Eli's healing was the most gradual. Trust came hard to a child who'd been taught that safety was an illusion. But day by day, moment by moment, he began to believe that not everyone who had power over him would use it to cause pain. The breakthrough came on an ordinary afternoon. Jacob was repairing a fence when Eli appeared beside him, silent as always, watching him work. "Want to help?" Jacob offered, holding out a hammer. Eli hesitated. Then, slowly, he took the tool. His small hands struggled with the weight, but he didn't give up. He pounded nail after nail into the wood, his jaw set with concentration. "You're good at this," Jacob said. "My daddy taught me. Before." Eli's voice was barely audible. He said a man's worth is in what he builds, not what he tears down. Your daddy was right. He's dead now. They all are. Eli kept hammering, not looking up. But I remember what he taught me. I remember everything. That's how we keep people alive, Eli, by remembering them, by carrying their lessons forward. The boy finally looked at him, those ancient eyes searching for something. Will you remember us? If something happens, and we have to leave. Nothing's going to happen. But yes, I remember you, every single day for the rest of my life. Promise? I promise. Eli nodded once, satisfied. Then he went back to hammering, and Jacob felt something unknot in his chest. Another wall coming down. Another child beginning to trust. Patty's voice returned in fragments, words emerging like flowers pushing through snow. Hungry. Tired. Clara. Simple communications that felt like miracles. By summer's end, she was speaking in full sentences, though she still preferred to communicate through drawing and gesture. She's going to be okay, Doc Weatherby pronounced during his monthly visit. Whatever broke in her is starting to mend. Will she ever be normal? Normal? The doctor laughed. None of these children will ever be normal, Jacob. They've seen too much, survived too much. But they can be healthy. They can be happy. They can build lives worth living. He paused. And that's not nothing. That's everything. The first anniversary of their rescue came on a cold December day. Jacob had lost track of the exact date, but Clara remembered. She always remembered. 1 year ago today, you found us in that cabin, she said, standing beside him on the porch as snow began to fall. 1 year since everything changed. Feels longer. Feels shorter, too. Both at the same time. Clara pulled her coat tighter. I've been thinking about what I want to do. With my life, I mean. Now that I'm allowed to think about the future. What did you decide? I want to teach, like my father, but not just reading and writing. Her gray eyes were fierce with purpose. I want to teach children who've been through what we went through. Show them they're not broken. Help them find their voices the way you helped us find ours. That's a beautiful dream, Clara. It's not a dream anymore. It's a plan. She looked up at him. Mrs. Caldwell says she'll pay for my education. There's a normal school in Denver that trains teachers. She thinks I could be ready in 2 years, maybe less. Denver's a long way from here. I know, but I'll come back. This is home. Clara's voice caught slightly. Your home. All of you. No matter where I go or what I do, that won't change. Jacob felt his throat tighten. This girl who'd been left to die on a roadside, who'd protected 7 other children through sheer force of will, who'd taught him what family really meant. She was going to change the world. I'm proud of you, he said. More proud than I know how to say. I know. Clara smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. I'm proud of me too. Finally. The years that followed transformed the ranch into something none of them had imagined. Mrs. Caldwell's influence and resources helped establish it as a haven for orphaned and abandoned children throughout the territory. By the time Clara returned from teacher training, there were 12 children living there, then 20, then more. Will became Jacob's right hand, managing the daily operations with the same steady competence he'd shown protecting his siblings in the cabin. Maggie went east to study law, sending letters full of outrage and determination. Sam published his first book at 19, a searing account of child labor that sparked reform movements across the country. Ben opened a bakery in Silver Creek, making bread with recipes his father had taught him. Rosie's children's books became beloved classics, read in homes from Montana to Massachusetts. Eli stayed at the ranch, working with the horses, finding peace in the simple rhythms of caring for animals who asked nothing but kindness. And Patty, the silent girl who'd found her voice in a moment of terror, grew into a woman who painted pictures that made people weep. Her art hung in galleries and museums, images of children surviving against impossible odds, of strangers becoming family, of love found in the most unlikely places. You built something remarkable, Gus said one evening, sitting on the porch with Jacob as the sun set. They were both old men now, gray-haired and slow-moving, but still present, still fighting. We built it together. No, Jefe. You started it. That day on the road, when you chose to stop instead of riding past. Everything since then grew from that moment. I just did what needed doing. That's what makes it remarkable. You saw children who needed help, and you helped them. Simple. Obvious. And somehow the rarest thing in the world. Clara visited often, bringing stories from her school in Denver, where she taught children who reminded her of herself. Damaged. Determined. Desperate for someone to believe in them. I told them about you, she said during one visit, sitting in the kitchen where she'd eaten her first real meal in weeks so many years ago. About the man who stopped on a frozen road and changed everything. I hope you didn't make me sound too heroic. I told them the truth, that you were stubborn and scared and had no idea what you were doing. Clara grinned. And that you did it anyway. That's the part that matters. Jacob looked around the kitchen, filled with children who'd come from nowhere and been made into family. Some were cooking dinner. Others were doing homework. All of them were safe. All of them were loved. It's enough, he said quietly. More than enough. It's a legacy, Clara corrected. The kind that lasts. Long after we're gone, these children will raise children of their own. And they'll teach them what you taught us. That family is a choice. That broken things can heal.
that one person stopping to help can change the entire world. The snow began to fall outside, soft and steady, covering the ranch in white. Somewhere in the barn, horses nickered contentedly. In the bunkhouse, children laughed over shared jokes. And in the kitchen, a family gathered around a warm stove, bound not by blood, but by something stronger. Jacob McAllister had ridden out on a winter morning, expecting nothing but another day of survival.
He'd found 8 children left to die in the cold, and he'd made a choice that would define the rest of his life. Not because he was a hero, not because he had answers or resources or any certainty that things would work out, but because some choices were bigger than fear. Some moments demanded more than self-preservation. And some strangers were just family you hadn't met yet. The girl with the twisted leg had asked him once why he stopped, why he cared about children he didn't know. The answer was simple: because they needed him, because he needed them, because in a world that could be brutal and cold and unforgiving, the only thing that made any of it bearable was reaching out a hand to someone who was falling. Clara Whitmore had crawled across a frozen floor to protect children who weren't her blood. Jacob McAllister had climbed off his horse in a blizzard to save children he'd never met. And together, they'd built something that would outlast them both. A home. A family. A legacy of love that proved the impossible was possible, that broken things could mend, and that one choice made in a single frozen moment could echo through generations. That was the truth of it, the whole truth, written in the lives of children who'd been given second chances, and the man who'd taught them that second chances were worth fighting for. And that truth, like the family it created, would last forever.